The Pax drifted through the stars like an ancient leviathan, its gleaming hull casting sharp reflections off the shimmering starlight that bathed the galactic expanse. From the observation deck, the planet Earth of blue and green marble loomed beneath them, a vibrant, deadly sphere in the dark void of space. It was a planet known for its unpredictability, its furious storms, and its violent history. Yet, here it was, a planet of interest for the galaxy's most enlightened beings. At least, that's how they saw themselves. Inside the gleaming halls of the Pax, the mood was a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The ship's pristine white corridors hummed softly with the sounds of alien voices in multiple dialects. Today was no ordinary day for the delegation aboard the ship. Today was humanity's day, a chance for the peaceful galactic civilizations to come face to face with the planet they had long whispered about with a mix of fear and disdain. Earth. Max Vance stood at the front of the expansive lecture hall, the room pulsing with quiet murmurs. Behind him, a large holographic display flickered to life, showcasing Earth's features: vast oceans, towering mountains, dense jungles, and sprawling deserts. Ladies, gentlemen, and other species of the galaxy, Max began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room. You've heard the stories. You've seen the data. This planet Earth is unlike any you've encountered. It's a death world. He let the weight of the word hang in the air. A few murmurs rippled through the alien students seated in front of him. They came from all corners of the galaxy. Xalorians, with their soft, feathered skin and large, liquid eyes. Jothar, built for survival in violent winds and storms. Even the meticulous Vekthar, whose crystalline skin could withstand intense radiation. But none of them had ever stepped foot on Earth. Max paced slowly in front of the class, eyes flicking over the group. They were eager, sure, but he could see the skepticism in their faces. They had all read the reports. Earth was a place known for its unpredictable weather, its history of war, its savage animals. It had earned its reputation, but nothing could truly prepare them for what Earth really was. To most of you, the idea of survival in such an environment might seem primitive, even savage. Max continued, his voice tightening, just a hint of pride in it. But you'll see that humanity thrives in places like this because of our adaptability. We're not just survivors, we're innovators. We don't just endure, we overcome. He paused, letting the words sink in. He wasn't here to sugarcoat it, to make Earth seem like some idyllic paradise, like the perfect utopia many of the galactic species had evolved to create. No, Earth was real. It was raw. It was life at its most brutal and beautiful. As the display shifted to show a video of a thunderstorm rolling across a savanna, with lightning splitting the sky, Max glanced to the side, his eyes briefly locking with those of Lyrix, the Xalorian representative. Lyrix was seated at the front of the classroom, their posture stiff and regal, eyes narrowed in the way that Max had come to recognize as condescension. Lyrix, the peacekeeper, the diplomat, the one who believed in harmony above all. To them, Earth was a savage thing, a place that should be avoided, a place where the bloodshed of humanity's past loomed far too large. Max didn't care. He had seen enough of their kind, these perfect, polished species that believed intelligence could exist without conflict. That pacifism was the highest form of civilization. They didn't know what it meant to survive in a world where survival was a struggle, where everything could end in an instant. Now, Max said, his tone shifting as he clicked a button on the console beside him. A 3D model of Earth's vast jungles appeared, the thick trees blocking out sunlight, dangerous creatures lurking behind every corner. You see these forests? This is where humanity learned to fight, to adapt, to innovate. And yes, we've learned to battle ourselves along the way. But it's in our nature. We didn't evolve in peace, and we don't survive in peace. You'll find that out soon enough. There was a subtle shifting in the air, a growing discomfort. Lyrix's expression remained cool, but Max could see the uncertainty in their eyes. This wasn't just about Earth anymore. This was about the galaxy. It was about who belonged, who thrived, and who was to be left behind in the annals of history. Over the next few weeks, Max continued, a touch of a smirk pulling at his lips. You'll learn what it means to survive on a planet like Earth. You'll face storms, creatures, and terrain unlike anything you've known. You'll experience the struggle firsthand. But I'll tell you this, right here and now, when the lesson is over, you will never look at humanity the same way again. He paused for effect, his gaze shifting from one student to the next. This is a death world, and humans, we're not just alive here, we're thriving. As he stood there, letting his words hang in the air, the quiet hum of the ship's system seemed to fade away. The alien students sat in stunned silence. Some were uneasy, some were intrigued, but none were entirely prepared for what was coming next. Chapter 2. The First Trial. The simulation chamber aboard the Pax was vast, about the size of a small stadium, and the walls were made of dark reflective panels, giving the entire room an almost clinical coldness. The alien students stood in their assigned clusters, each of them clearly out of their element, their bodies shifting awkwardly as they awaited the start of their first test on Earth. Max Vance stood at the far end of the chamber, arms crossed, eyes sharp as he observed them. The Pax's training simulations were known for their complexity, designed to push the boundaries of even the most advanced species. And today, the students would face a trial unlike any they had encountered before Earth's deadly weather. This is just the beginning, ladies and gentlemen, Max said, his voice booming across the room. On Earth, you'll be tested by everything from blizzards to volcanoes, earthquakes to tsunamis. You'll see what it takes to survive when nature has no mercy. A few of the students exchanged nervous glances. Max watched them carefully. The Xalorians, with their peaceful demeanor, were uneasy. They had evolved in a world where survival was guaranteed, where every animal, every species, lived in harmony. Then there was Vekthar, a Jothar, tough, rugged, accustomed to violent storms and harsh winds. He stood a little straighter, though still visibly uncomfortable in this new environment. But it was Zora, the young human, who stood out the most, her eyes sparkling with determination. She was a survivor, a product of Earth's chaotic history, and she was ready for anything. Today, we're going to simulate a rare, but incredibly destructive event, Max continued, his eyes flicking to the holographic display that loomed over the group. It flickered to life, projecting a terrifying image of dark clouds swirling in a cyclone, a Category 5 hurricane. The winds will tear apart buildings, the rain will flood entire cities, and the pressure will drop to dangerous levels. For the next 20 minutes, this is Earth, and you, Max paused, letting the weight of his words settle in. You will survive. The chamber shifted with a soft hum, the walls transforming to reflect the simulation's harsh reality. The temperature dropped, and the once steady air now carried a sense of imminent threat. There was no escape. The students would be forced to adapt and use their wits in the face of nature's fury. Ready or not, it starts now, Max said, and with the press of a button, the simulation began. The storm hit with an almost deafening roar. Max grinned, watching the chaos unfold as the students scrambled to find shelter. The wind tore at their clothes and the rain lashed out like whips. Zora, however, was already acting. Her hands moved quickly, pulling debris from a nearby pile to form a makeshift shelter. She wasn't fazed. She'd been raised in Earth's tough street. Survival came as second nature. The Xalorians, however, were struggling. Lyrix, their leader, had been utterly composed moments before, but now the storm was testing their resolve. They were unprepared for the relentless forces of nature. Their long, flowing robes were drenched, their bright eyes wide with disbelief as the wind howled around them. Seraphis, a younger Xalorian, darted behind a pile of rubble, their crystalline skin gleaming in the dim light of the storm. "We need to find shelter," Lyrix barked, voice thin and panicked as they tried to shield themselves from the torrent of rain. Their eyes darted around, but the reality of the situation was sinking and they were no longer in control. This wasn't the sterile, controlled environment of their home planet. Meanwhile, Vekthar seemed more at home in the chaos. He was moving swiftly, his long limbs carrying him with a fluid grace that came from years of surviving violent weather patterns on his home planet. He knew what to do in the face of a storm. His race had evolved in constant turbulence. He wasn't flustered like the Xalorians. Instead, his focus sharpened. Max could see that Vekthar understood the urgency. The storm was no longer just a test, it was a fight for survival. "Sort, over here," Vekthar shouted above the noise of the storm. Zora, hearing the urgency in his voice, quickly scrambled over to him, her eyes scanning the environment. The wind howled again, and Zora squinted through the deluge of rain, finally spotting a small structure, an emergency shelter used for the simulation. "Help me move this," Zora shouted, her voice filled with a determination that Max knew all too well. She was all too familiar with what it meant to survive everything she had learned. Every hardship she had endured was now in play. Together, Zora and Vekthar used their strength and ingenuity to pull the shelter into place, creating a safe haven for the group to huddle in. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Zora, breathing heavily, wiped the rainwater from her face and glanced back at the others. Lyrix, however, was still struggling to hold their composure. The Xalorians had no experience with this kind of disaster, and the storm had unbalanced their usually calm minds. Seraphis had attempted to help them, but was too overwhelmed by the magnitude of the situation to do much more than hold onto Lyrix for stability. Max watched all of this from the sidelines, his expression unreadable. He could see the panic in the eyes of the Xalorians, the calm but controlled focus in Vekthar's movements and Zora's quick-thinking actions. They were all being tested, but Zora was thriving. "Stop, everyone, stop," Max shouted over the wind, his voice sharp and commanding. The students froze, looking toward him. The storm, it seemed, had been part of the test, but the real lesson was about to begin. You've all survived so far, but this isn't just about surviving nature. It's about overcoming it. Adaptation. Finding your way, not just by reacting, but by thinking critically. Earth doesn't just test you, it changes you. You'll be forever shaped by its challenges. Zora's chest was heaving, her hands still gripping the shelter for stability. But there was a spark in her eyes. She was already thinking about what she'd do next. She wasn't just surviving the storm, she was learning from it. Max's voice softened slightly as he looked around at the group. "That's what you need to understand about Earth. It's unforgiving, yes, but it's also where you find the strength you didn't know you had." Chapter 3, Earth's Brutality, Humanity's Resilience. The ship Pax remained stationary in the orbit of Earth as the simulation chamber shifted once again. The soft hum of its engines reverberated through the walls, but it was the sight outside the viewing windows that had most of the students on edge. Earth, blue and green, spun beneath them like a living jewel, a beautiful and dangerous world that still held so many mysteries. Today, Max Vance was going to show them the real face of Earth, not just the storms or the disaster scenario, but the full range of its brutal, unpredictable beauty. Today, you'll experience something more than just a simulation, Max said as the ship's artificial gravity adjusted. He stood tall at the head of the room, his eyes flashing with a mix of confidence and challenge. "No fake winds, no safe shelters. You'll walk on Earth's surface, and you'll face what it means to survive in a place that doesn't care whether you're ready." There was a ripple of unease across the alien students. Some looked apprehensive, others curious. The Xalorians, as always, remained poised but skeptical. Max knew what they were thinking. Peace and calm were the Xalorian way, and Earth was a concept they considered barbaric. To them, survival was something that could be handled with diplomacy, with careful thought, with strategies and negotiations. Earth, on the other hand, had no time for those things. On Earth, nature took its course, and only the adaptable survived. Max's voice broke through their quiet murmurs. "Zora, Vekthar, come up here." Zora and Vekthar made their way to the front of the room, their eyes flicking to each other as they approached. Zora's face was lit with excitement. Vekthar's demeanor was calm, but deliberate. Both were human enough to know the stakes, to feel the weight of what was about to happen. Zora, Max said, I need you to think of Earth as you would any survival situation. It's about adaptation. The terrain, the predators, the weather, it all pushes you to innovate. Now I'm going to show you how to use everything around you, and you won't have time to second guess yourself. Zora nodded, eager for the challenge. Vekthar, Max turned to him, his tone taking on a more serious edge. You've faced storms before, right? But Earth storms, the scale is different. The pressure, the intensity. It doesn't just test your strength. It tests your wits, your ability to think fast and to act. Vekthar's deep-set eyes narrowed as he met Max's gaze. I understand, he said, his voice deep but steady. We don't have the luxury of time. Exactly, Max responded, a small smile creeping onto his lips. Let's see if you're as quick on your feet as you think. Max turned toward the massive holographic display, and with a swipe of his hand, the ship's simulation room shifted. The floor beneath them vibrated as the familiar surroundings of the packs disappeared. In their place, the scene became Earth itself, vast, wild, untamed. The sky above was dark and brooding, dense clouds swirling in an ominous formation. The ground was uneven, rocky, and scattered with dense foliage. A jagged mountain range stretched into the distance, and the air was thick with humidity. This is Earth's Amazon rainforest, Max explained, his voice low but intense. Not just the tropical beauty you've heard about in reports. It's full of danger plants that can kill, animals that can ambush you at any time. The rains come suddenly and without warning, and they're fierce. The alien students shuffled uneasily, their eyes scanning the simulation. Lyrix Kavar's sharp gaze shifted to the dark clouds, clearly uncomfortable. But Max didn't care about their comfort. He cared about their survival. You have 10 minutes, Max said, his voice commanding. I'll be watching. But you're on your own to figure it out. Your task is simple. Get from here to the shelter point marked on your maps. That's your only goal. The environment, the creatures, the weather, they're all against you. But so is Earth. That's the point. There's no predicting it, only adapting. He turned on his heel and stepped aside, watching carefully. Zora was the first to move. She darted forward, her eyes scanning the terrain. Without hesitation, she dropped to her knees and began digging through the dirt, pulling out the dense, moist roots of a large plant. Max had taught her this: the roots were an essential source of nutrients when supplies were limited. She ripped the largest ones out, stuffing them into her pack as she looked for the next step. Vekthar took a different approach. The Jothar had been trained to analyze the surrounding terrain instinctively. He crouched low, his eyes flicking between the dense trees and the shifting clouds. Rain's coming, he muttered under his breath, his voice gravelly. A sudden, loud crack echoed through the jungle, and Max's eyes narrowed. Zora and Vekthar froze. A massive creature, a jaguar-like predator with sharp, white teeth, emerged from the brush, its eyes fixed on them. The students remained still, each of them calculating their next move. Vekthar was the first to act. Without hesitation, he grabbed a large branch, using it to signal Zora to move backward toward a series of rocks that could offer some cover. They had no weapons, no tech, just their instincts and what Earth had given them. Zora's hand instinctively reached for a vine, swinging it across a gap in the rocks and helping Vekthar climb. The predator prowled closer, but it didn't attack, not yet. It was waiting for the right moment. This was the moment Max was waiting for. How would they respond? Zora, her back against the rocks, eyes wide with adrenaline, pulled a sharp-edged stone from her pack, holding it tightly in her hand. She wasn't trained to kill, but she was trained to survive. And right now, that was all that mattered. Max watched the scene play out. He could feel the tension, the raw instinct kicking in. Zora was learning. Vekthar was testing his limits. And the Xalorians were still standing at the edge of the chaos, unsure of how to engage with something so primal. The storm hit first. The winds picked up, and rain came pouring down in sheets. The predator turned tail, retreating into the jungle as quickly as it had appeared. You're lucky, Max called, his voice cutting through the rain. But you handled it. The key to surviving here isn't just the strength to fight. It's the ability to read the environment. to think on your feet. Zora, catching her breath, looked at Vekthar, who was already scanning the next threat. I think I'm starting to understand, she said, her voice trembling with the excitement of the challenge. You're beginning to adapt, Max said with a smile. That's the real lesson of Earth. Nothing's predictable. Everything changes in an instant. As the rain intensified, the alien students began to understand. The world they had thought they knew was nothing like Earth. Here, survival wasn't just about intelligence or harmony or strategy. It was about being able to change, to adapt, and to learn from each new challenge that the planet threw at them. For the first time, the peaceful beings aboard the Pax had seen what it really meant to survive. Chapter 4: The Secret Admirer. The Pax had drifted far from Earth's orbit by now, and the alien students had settled into their daily routines. The ship's corridors, once teeming with the hushed excitement of the recent trials, were now quieter, more introspective. In the wake of the survival exercises, Max Vance noticed the shift in the room as much as the students themselves did. While some, like Zora, wore their adrenaline like a badge of honor, others, particularly the Xalorians, had become more subdued. They kept to themselves, retreating to their corners. But there was something more to it, something deeper. Max had noticed it first with Lyrix Kavar. The Xalorian diplomat, once a figure of absolute poise, had begun to wear a slight frown that never quite left their face. There was tension beneath the surface, a quiet discomfort that came from facing a reality so different from the one they had been taught to revere. It wasn't just the storm or the predator that rattled them. It was Earth itself, the rawness of it, the starkness. The Xalorians had learned to bend nature to their will, to live in harmony with their surroundings. But Earth wasn't about harmony. It was about survival, the kind that didn't spare the weak. The fact that Earth's very existence defied their peaceful philosophy seemed to gnaw at Lyrix, like a persistent wound. Max could see it in the way their gaze lingered a little too long on Zora, who, despite the storm's intensity, had moved with a confidence that was impossible to ignore. Zora, as young and brash as she was, had become the epitome of Earth's spirit, resourceful, adaptable, willing to push forward no matter the odds. But it wasn't just Zora who caught Lyrix's attention. It was something in the way Zora had worked with Vekthar, the Jothar who, by all accounts, was a little more used to Earth's kind of violence. Together, they had forged a bond that seemed almost innate. Lyrix had always believed that a peaceful species could achieve what the violent ones could not. Yet here was a young human, facing storms and predators with calm decisiveness, showing them how to think, to adapt, to grow in the face of nature's fury. And then there was Seraphis, one of Lyrix's most trusted students. Seraphis had always been the quiet one, the thinker, the observer. They didn't speak often, but when they did, their voice held the weight of logic and reason. Yet, even Seraphis seemed to be reconsidering their position. Max had caught them several times, watching Zora closely. The look in their eyes wasn't one of judgment. It was curiosity, and settling curiosity. "Hey, Max," Zora's voice cut through his thoughts, pulling him from his silent observation. She had approached him in the corridor, her expression a mix of excitement and impatience. "I saw something earlier. It's in the simulation room. You should take a look." Max arched an eyebrow. "What are you up to now?" Zora's grin widened. "You'll see." Curiosity piqued, Max followed her down the hallway to the simulation chamber. Inside, the room was dark, and the holoprojector hummed with low energy. Zora moved quickly, tapping a few buttons on the control panel. A fresh simulation flashed to life on the screen, a scene from Earth's dense jungles. But there was something different about it. It wasn't just a random scene. Max's eyes narrowed as the image began to form. It was a challenge, a test, and not one he had put together. "This is yours?" Max asked, his voice a little sharper than usual. Zora shrugged, stepping aside. "I thought it might be a good way to push us a little harder. The predators in the jungle aren't the only thing we should be worried about. Earth is a test of more than just survival. It's about the will to push forward." Max crossed his arms, surveying the challenge before them. It was one of Earth's legendary environments, difficult to navigate, full of dangers not just from animals, but from the land itself. The ground was shifting, unstable, and unpredictable. In short, it was everything the Xalorians weren't prepared for. But as the simulation began, something unexpected happened. Seraphis entered the room. At first, Max thought they were there to observe, to critique, but instead, Seraphis walked toward the console, their face set in quiet determination. They didn't ask for permission, didn't even look Max in the eye as they began to input their own data. They were recalibrating the challenge, adding new elements that weren't just survival-based, but learning-based. Earth's environment had to be understood on a deeper level. Seraphis was taking a risk, that much was clear. But it was also an acknowledgement. You're adjusting the parameters, Max said softly, stepping closer. Seraphis didn't look up. Yes, Earth isn't about just brute force. It's about understanding its complexities. The students need to learn how to adapt, not just fight. Max felt a flicker of surprise. It wasn't that Seraphis didn't understand Earth's challenges, it was that they had been willing to admit that Earth's lesson was something more than they had first realized. They had started to shift their thinking. Zora's eyes widened, sensing the change. Seraphis, are you? I'm learning, Seraphis said simply, pressing a few final commands before turning to Max. We all are. Max allowed himself a slow, satisfied smile. This is just the beginning. The rest of the class began filtering in, confusion clouding their faces at first. But as the simulation changed, with new, more subtle challenges introduced, Max could feel a shift in the room. Lyrix, standing at the back, glanced over at Zora. There was no contempt in their eyes, no judgment, just a slow, dawning realization that Earth, and all its chaotic wonder, held a different kind of wisdom. Chapter 5, Stranded and Tested. The Pax glided through the stars, a ship of elegance and advanced technology. But for all its grace, it was nothing compared to Earth. As it hovered just above the atmosphere, the planet's immensity seemed to loom beneath the ship's reinforced windows, vast oceans, towering mountains, and the great shifting storms that churned through the atmosphere. Max Vance watched Earth from the observation deck, a faint smirk on his lips. This was where humanity had been forged, not in the comforts of technology or the safety of a peaceful, controlled existence. No, Earth had sculpted humanity in the fire of struggle, conflict, and survival. And today, Max was about to teach his students just how quickly the fire could turn from a gentle warmth to a raging inferno. The lights flickered, and the hum of the ship's engine slowly dissipated as the Pax shifted into a standard emergency mode. Max turned from the window, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. An emergency drill wasn't scheduled for this time. Something felt off. Zora's voice rang out from behind him, a note of concern creeping into her usually chipper tone. He turned to find her standing with Vekthar and Lyrix, their expressions clouded with uncertainty. We've lost power to the main systems, Zora said, glancing over her shoulder at the console, where blinking lights flickered erratically. This isn't in the schedule. It's not just a drill. Something's wrong. Max's eyes sharpened. Everybody, get to the command deck. Now, within moments, the students and crew members filtered into the command area, each one's face painted with a different mix of confusion and curiosity. They had no idea what was happening, but Max did. There was a sickening realization in his gut, a feeling he'd learned to trust. During his years of military service, the Pax was under attack. A loud thud reverberated through the hull, followed by a violent shake that knocked everyone off balance. The lights dimmed again, flickering to nothingness. The ship's artificial gravity sputtered for a brief moment before stabilizing, but the damage was already done. Everyone was jolted out of their composure, the panic creeping in. Even Lyrix, who had maintained an air of quiet superiority throughout the journey, now looked as shaken as the rest of them. What the hell was that? Vekthar's voice cut through the tension. Max didn't wait for an answer. Stay calm. Follow orders. We have to get to the outer hull. They raced down the narrow halls of the packs, the walls groaning under the stress of whatever had hit them. Their shoes clattered against the metallic floors, the urgency in their steps palpable. Max's mind was already several moves ahead, processing the information he had some unknown assailant had damaged the ship's shielding, and the atmosphere outside was rapidly becoming unstable. When they reached the outer observation bay, Max didn't wait for the others. He quickly accessed the control panel, his fingers flying across the interface as the rest of the group arrived. The digital display flickered as he input the override codes, trying to stabilize the ship's systems. "Max," Zora shouted, looking up at the observation bay window. "We're not alone." Outside the glass, Max could see a massive asteroid storm, swirling with debris at high speed. The ship had inadvertently drifted right into the center of the storm's path. He cursed under his breath. Not only had the packs been sabotaged, but now it was caught in one of the most dangerous space phenomena known to humanity. "Get us out of here," Lyrix demanded, their voice straining with panic for the first time. Max didn't respond immediately. He was already working on the emergency stabilizers, trying to reroute the energy flow. His years of military experience had prepared him for moments like this where every second mattered, where hesitation could cost lives. But it wasn't enough. The ship shuddered again, harder this time, throwing them all to the floor. The lights flickered out completely, leaving them in darkness. In the eerie silence that followed, Max could hear the distant pounding thrum of the asteroid impacts against the ship's hull. The Pax was being torn apart from the outside. "We need to leave the ship," Max said, his voice steady despite the chaos. He grabbed a flashlight and turned to the group, focusing on Zora and Vekthar. "Now, it's our only shot." "What are you talking about?" Lyrix demanded, their voice sharp. "We can't just leave. The storm will kill us all." Max didn't bother arguing. "We have the training, the skills to survive. But if we stay on the ship, we'll be dead before we even make it through the outer hull." Zora looked at him, her face hardening with determination. She had come to trust Max's judgment over the course of their journey. She nodded at him. "What do we need to do?" "Head to the escape pods. I'll make sure you get there safely." Vekthar was already moving, the Jothar's long limbs cutting through the room with a fluidity that came from surviving harsher environments. Zora followed close behind, her pack slung over one shoulder. Lyrix hesitated, clearly torn between the familiar comforts of the packs and the terrifying unknown of survival. But they had no choice. As they reached the escape pods, the ship groaned again, louder this time. As the asteroid storm raked across its surface, the evacuation doors were malfunctioning, but Max wasted no time. He bypassed the system, manually unlocking the hatches. The hissing sound of airlock sealing echoed in the stillness. "What about you?" Zora asked, looking up at Max with concern. "Aren't you coming with us?" Max shook his head, his expression grim. "I'll stay behind. I'll make sure you're all clear." There wasn't time for more discussion. Max pushed them into the pods, his eyes scanning the chaotic scene for any sign of a way out. The storm outside had reached its peak. The asteroids were closing in. He could feel the ship's hull begin to crack under the pressure. With one final, almost imperceptible breath, Max hit the launch button, and the escape pod shot into space. The Pax was now little more than a shattered wreck, tumbling into the void. As the pods drifted into the safety of open space, Max stared out through the small window, watching the debris of the Pax burn up in the asteroid storm. His job wasn't finished. They were still far from safe, and Earth's trials had only just begun. But humanity, he knew, had survived worse. It was in their blood. It was in their bones. Chapter 6, The Final Test, Proving Humanity's Strength. The stars outside the escape pods' reinforced windows stretched and long, jagged streaks of light as the small vessel drifted away from the wreckage of the Pax. The asteroid storm, which had torn the ship apart, was now behind them. But the silence inside the pod was thick with tension. The only sound was the low hum of the pod's engine as it navigated into safer space. Max Vance sat at the helm, his knuckles tight on the controls. His eyes were focused, scanning the debris field as the escape pod moved slowly through the remnants of the once pristine CRUISCR. Behind him, Zora, Vekthar, and Lyrix were gathered in silence. The weight of their situation had only just begun to settle on them. They had barely escaped the storm, but what was waiting for them ahead was just as deadly. Max broke the silence first. "We need to make contact with Earth," he said, his voice calm but firm. "The ship's wreckage won't be able to reach any of the supply stations, and we're too far out to get help from the nearest colony. The next step is to head to the closest habitable zone on Earth. That's our only chance for survival." Zora turned to him, her face serious but steady. She had gone through so much already, surviving the simulation, escaping the Pax's destruction, and now she had to face Earth itself, a planet full of dangers she hadn't yet encountered. "We're actually going back?" she asked, her voice a little more cautious than usual. "To Earth?" Max nodded, his expression unshakable. "The storm on Earth's surface is dangerous, yes, but if we can land safely, we'll be able to survive. Earth isn't just about fighting or running. It's about finding the right place to stand and making it work. You'll learn that soon enough." Vekthar spoke up from the back, his deep voice cutting through the tension. "I've faced storms on my world, but Earth's are different," he said, the edge of excitement unmistakable in his tone. "I've seen nothing like it. There is something alive in the atmosphere itself. The air has weight, the pressure is different." Max gave a sharp nod. "That's why it's so important to prepare your mind and body to adapt. It's not about brute strength. It's about understanding the environment, using your senses to gauge the dangers. That's Earth's true lesson. Nothing is ever certain here. But that's also what makes it so damn beautiful." Lyrix, still quieter than usual, leaned forward. "I don't know if I can ever understand it. Earth's violence is alien to me. I've been trained to avoid conflict, to find peaceful solutions. But on Earth, there's no time to talk, only fight." Max turned in his seat, meeting Lyrix's gaze. "That's where you're wrong," he said. "Earth isn't about fighting all the time. It's about making the right choice. The fight isn't always with fists or weapons, it's with the land itself. With the elements, the creatures, the weather. Earth is relentless, but it isn't always hostile. It'll push you to your limits, sure, but it'll also give you everything you need to survive if you know where to look." The escape pod drifted in silence for a moment before Max continued, his hands moving over the control panel as he adjusted their trajectory toward Earth. "We're landing in a remote region near the jungle. It's treacherous, don't get me wrong. The climate is volatile, the terrain is harsh, but it's the perfect place for a test of your skills. We won't survive just by huddling in a shelter. We have to learn how to use what the land gives us. Once we touch down, we'll be on our own. There's no turning back now." Zora glanced at Lyrix, who looked more rigid than usual. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Zora asked, her tone softer than usual. "I mean, Earth's not exactly what you're used to. If we're going to survive, we need to stick together, and we can't afford hesitation." Lyrix's gaze softened for a moment. Then, with a breath that seemed to gather all their prior attention, they nodded. "I understand. We will adapt, but I won't pretend to have the experience you do." Max cut in before Zora could respond. "It's not about experience, it's about resilience. Don't worry about what you don't know. Focus on what you can do. That's what Earth teaches." The pod began to descend, the hum of the engines increasing in pitch as the atmosphere thickened around them. Earth's gravity tugged at their bodies, pressing them down. Max looked out the window and saw the first dark outline of the jungle below. The trees stretched up toward the sky like fingers reaching for the heavens, vast and untamed. "Here we go," Max said, more to himself than to anyone else. As the escape pod made its final descent, the surrounding jungle came into sharper focus. The thick foliage swirled below them, a sea of green with glimpses of dark brown trunks and glistening, moist underbrush. Max knew that the moment their feet touched the ground, everything would change. They were no longer passengers on a ship bound for safety. They were on Earth, a death world, and their only choice was to survive. With a jolt, The pod hit the ground, sending a shockwave through the metal frame. The landing was rough, but it held. The hatch door opened with a hiss of hydraulic steam, and the stifling air outside rushed in. Heat, humidity, and the thick smell of wet earth enveloped them instantly. "Out, now," Max commanded, moving quickly to the door. Zora followed immediately, her eyes scanning the environment with a mix of fear and exhilaration. Vekthar stepped down behind her, his posture instinctively ready for any potential threats. Lyrix hesitated, staring at the jungle as if the wilderness itself might eat them alive. But Max didn't wait for them. He had already stepped outside and was scanning the area. "We're on the clock," Max called over his shoulder. "We have shelter about a quarter-mile from here. We don't have time to waste." Zora nodded and, without a word, began to move toward the trees. The group followed, Max leading them into the dense undergrowth. The ground was soft and uneven beneath their feet, the air thick with the sounds of buzzing insects and distant animal calls. Max wasn't worried about the immediate threats. They had plenty of time before any predators would be out in full force. But they had to move fast. Earth's unpredictable weather was the real enemy. "Stay close and keep your eyes open," Max said, his voice low but urgent. Zora, Vekthar, and even Lyrix were quick to follow, their senses on high alert. The jungle was more dangerous than any simulation. This was real. They had to be ready for anything. Earth was relentless, but as Max had said, it gave them everything they needed if they knew how to find it. Chapter 7: Understanding and Respect. The sun was low in the sky, casting long, shadowed fingers through the thick canopy of trees that surrounded the small clearing. Where they had set up camp, Max Vance knelt near a small fire, carefully adjusting the spit over the flames. His gaze flickered from the fire to the group of students gathered around him, each of them exhausted, but no longer the wide-eyed beginners they had been when they first set foot on Earth. Zora, her face smeared with dirt and sweat, was tending to a rudimentary shelter made of branches and large leaves. Vekthar was sharpening a jagged rock he'd found earlier, preparing it for something useful. Though Max wasn't sure what, Lyrix, sitting slightly apart from the group, was staring at the fire, their expression unreadable. The Xalorian had said little since they had set up camp. The shock of the jungle's raw, unrelenting beauty was starting to wear thin. Max knew that Lyrix was struggling to reconcile what they had been taught about survival and what Earth had shown them. For the Xalorians, survival had always been a matter of diplomacy, of managing peace and order. On Earth, survival was a matter of instinct, of reading the land and the elements, and adapting in ways no peaceful philosophy could predict. Max broke the silence. "You're quiet today, Lyrix. How's the mind?" Lyrix's eyes flickered briefly toward him, but they didn't respond immediately. They looked down at their hands, clasped tightly in their lap. "It's difficult," they said, their voice soft but laced with the same quiet intensity Max had grown accustomed to. "I have learned much in these days, but I find that Earth does not make sense to me. There is no order, no balance. It is chaos." Max nodded, understanding the weight of those words. Earth's never been about balance. It's about adaptation, about learning to flow with the chaos, not against it. Zora, who had been fiddling with a bundle of leaves, turned to join the conversation. "I used to think Earth was just a place where you had to fight to survive," she said, her voice stronger now than it had been when they first arrived. "But it's not just about fighting. It's about listening to the land, paying attention. The way the rain falls, the way the trees grow. Everything has a rhythm." Max smiled to himself. Zora had come a long way. Her initial brashness had melted away in the heat of the jungle, replaced by a quiet understanding. She had found her place here. Lyrix met Zora's gaze for a moment, their eyes narrowing slightly. "And you've learned to become one with the chaos?" Lyrix's tone was a mix of disbelief and genuine curiosity. Zora gave a small shrug. "I think I'm learning. I'm not here to control everything. I'm here to figure out how to work with it. Maybe that's what Earth teaches you." Max's voice dropped as he added, "Earth doesn't care about what you want or what you think you deserve. It gives you what you need, whether you like it or not. The quiet stretch between them, filled only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of the jungle. Max could see Lyrix's mind working, trying to piece together a worldview. They had spent their whole life building a worldview that didn't fit with the brutal lessons Earth had forced upon them. Finally, Lyrix spoke again, their voice thoughtful. "Maybe I've been wrong," they admitted, their shoulders slumping slightly. "About everything. I thought peace meant control. I thought harmony meant keeping everything in its place. But here, it's not about controlling the world. It's about surviving in it." Max nodded, his eyes shifting to the darkening horizon. "It's not easy, and it doesn't make sense at first. But Earth's strength is in its unpredictability. It pushes you, challenges you to become more than you thought you could be. But you have to be willing to learn from it. You can't force it to bend to your will." There was a long silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Lyrix was still, their gaze fixed on the flickering flames. For the first time, they didn't seem so rigid. The lessons were starting to sink in, and that was enough for now. Zora broke the silence, her voice light but full of newfound wisdom. "You know," she said, "I think I'm finally starting to get it. Earth doesn't need us to fix it. It just needs us to be a part of it. If we do that, if we listen and adapt, it'll show us the way." Max smiled to himself, proud of his students. Exactly. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the air. As the last light of day faded into the dense jungle, Max, Zora, Vekthar, and even Lyrix were no longer just survivors on a strange planet. They were becoming something more, something deeper. They were learning, adapting, and, perhaps, for the first time, truly understanding Earth's lesson. And as the night grew darker, Max felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The kind of hope that came from knowing that no matter how harsh the world, no matter how brutal the lessons, humanity had the resilience to keep going, to survive, and one day, to thrive.